Hello, I am Melinda Pfundstein, host for this conversation with Dan O'Brien, playwright, poet, essayist, and librettist, friend and contributor to Sugar House Review, which is a semi-annual poetry magazine founded in 2019 when Utah didn't have an independent literary magazine or poetry-only magazine. Dan's work has appeared in multiple issues of the magazine, and Sugar House Review hosted a reading for Dan as part of the Utah Humanities Book Festival in 2019, which I had the great privilege of attending as my first connection to you and your work, Dan. And you all in the audience can watch that reading by going to Sugar's YouTube channel. I am a director, actor, speaker, nonprofit of the arts founder and executive director, and also a quantum strategist, healer, and coach. And most importantly, I'm honored to collaborate with Sugar and with you, Dan, for this conversation. So Dan O'Brien, I have so many questions.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. It's great to see you again. That reading was in the before times, right? That was fall of 2019.
Yeah, it was.
Feels near and far at the same time. So, and I'm a huge, long-time admirer of the review. So this is exciting. So I'm thankful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. So I experience your work through a theatrical lens, and that's my reference point. But we're having
so do I.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. Which is probably why I'm so drawn to you. But we're having this conversation through Sugar House, which has poetry as an access point. And so what I think we're really here to do together is to celebrate your work and you and a couple of your most recent works. But in my mind, more importantly, to explore the power of language and art and in such a time as this and your place in that, and just why we're doing what we're doing right now with all that's going on in the world. How's that sound to you?
That sounds great. That sounds really good.
Awesome. So I think there's nothing more uncomfortable than listening to a bio of yourself read back to you. I really want, with all these different writer hats that you wear, poet, playwright, librettist, essayist, I really want this audience, without having to click away, to understand kind of the scope of some of the work that you're doing. So would you mind if I share just a little bit of your bio?
Sure. Yeah, the propaganda, as I call it.
The propaganda, right.
No, I mean, it's all true, but these things get, yeah, I'll try not to look too uncomfortable. Thank you.
Okay.
Maybe I'll mute myself or something.
No, I understand.
You won't have to hear me sighing.
No, I understand the discomfort, but I do think it's really important to understand the scope of what we're talking about here. So playwright, poet, essayist, librettist. As a playwright, your play House in Scarsdale, a memoir for the stage, was the winner of 2018 PEN American Award in Drama. It received critically acclaimed world premiere at Boston Court, Pasadena, and was directed by Michael Machete. It was nominated for 6 Los Angeles Drama Critics Circle Prizes, including Best Play. Body of an American received an off-Broadway premiere at Primary Stages as a co-pro with Hartford Stage. It is a New York Times Critics Pick. You're currently under commission, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Guggenheim Fellow in Drama and Performance Art in 2015-16. Your compilation of plays is called Dan O'Brien Plays 1. Had plays developed at Primary Stages O'Neill, Playwrights Conference, New Harmony Project, Atlantic Theatre Company, Roundabout, American Conservatory Theatre, New York Theatre Workshop. As a poet, you have released 4 collections of poetry, most recently Our Cancers in 2021, which is one of the pieces that we're here to talk about today. As an essayist, you've released a collection of essays entitled A Story That Happens on Playwriting, Childhood, and Other Traumas, also published in 2021. As a librettist, wrote the libretti for Jonathan Berger's Visitations, Theatokea, and The War Reporter. Did I say that right? Theatokea?
Yeah, that's awesome. As far as I know.
Yes. Operas commissioned by the National Endowment for the Arts and Mellon Foundation for Stanford. You teach and have taught playwriting at Princeton, Sewanee's Writer Conference, University of the South in Sewanee, UWM in Madison, Wisconsin, SUNY Purchase, Grinnell College, Occidental College. your personal workshop in New York City, you're currently residing in Los Angeles with your wife, actor, writer, and producer Jessica St. Clair, and daughter Isabel. Now, hearing all of that, is there anything that you really want us to know?
Gee, I don't know. That I have a schnauzer. We have a lovely schnauzer named Emma, who we think is about 15 years old. She's kind of on her last legs, but she was our first child before we had a human child.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's great. I mean, that's wow. It's, you know, it's always, of course, uncomfortable to some degree to hear a bio synopsis, but it also, you know, makes you think about a so-called career in general. So thank you for that. I think it'll be a good frame for some of what we're going to talk about.
Perfect. Thank you. So,
sure.
As I said, I had the great pleasure of attending the Sugar House Live Poetry reading with you a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so taken not only by your poetry, but also by the ease and embodiment of your written and spoken word. And I think, again, that theatrical background, that you are a theater person, I think is probably what speaks to me most. But you spend a lot of time in both of these pieces of work with the unspeakable, as you have, as in your own words. But as you tackle the unspeakable, just to give our audience a little bit of context about how you got here. We came through 2020 election year, global pandemic, social, racial justice uprising, racial justice reckoning in the American theater, job crises, all of these. And you and your wife were navigating separate cancer diagnoses at the same time. So can you give us a little bit of context about the creation of these at that time?
Yeah, these two books, the essay collection and the poetry collection, grew directly out of the experience of consecutive cancer diagnoses and treatments. One first for my wife, she was diagnosed with stage 2B breast cancer in the fall of 2015. And then 6 months later, I was diagnosed with stage 4, but treatable, even potentially curable, knock on wood, colon cancer in March of 2016. I was diagnosed the day of my wife's last chemo infusion. So she was receiving the chemo and had to, was sort of wheeled herself down the hallway to another oncologist who diagnosed me. So it was a difficult year and a half. It was a kind of, in many ways, hellish year and a half. But in other ways, it was a time that was full of revelations, personal revelations, and insight about ourselves and about our lives. And my wife's an actor; she's written her own TV shows. So we both tried to deal with what we were going through with art. That's all we were good for, all we knew how to do, or all we know how to do. So she had a TV show on USA Network called Playing House. She wrote the final season of that series where her character was going through breast cancer treatment. And I was writing these poems and pretty soon these essays. These essays, they're a bit more about living post-treatment. They started as a lecture that I was invited to give at the Sewanee Writers Conference about playwriting in the summer, and I missed the 2016 conference because I was in the middle of treatment. So I came back in 2017 for the first time, actually. Previously I taught at Sewanee and never given a lecture because I lead workshops. I'm not necessarily comfortable expounding, what a play should be. I don't really believe in that in any way. But after what we had been through, I don't know. I wanted to accept the challenge of finding a way to write about the craft of playwriting in a way that I could believe in, in a way that, and for me, that meant, these essays are really a hybrid with memoir. They're much more about how I used to write plays, how I write plays, what theater means to me in general, what it means to survive, I think, whether it's cancer or in my life previously, what I consider to be an abusive childhood, being disowned by my family in my early 30s. There are other instances in my life other than the cancer where I felt there had been a trauma to live through and to survive. And that idea of living through trauma, the challenge of reinventing yourself through trauma felt inherently like a theatrical challenge or a dramaturgical challenge. My view of plays, or the plays I try to write, or the plays I respond to, they're not even necessarily all about conflict. That old sort of cliche, I guess, that all plays or all stories are about conflict. For me, they're about change. I want to see, not just the big revelation or the big change in the play or the climactic change. I want to see the moment to moment change in a character. That's what's exciting to me. And what is trauma but a catastrophe or disaster, that if you can survive is going to change who you are, So the essays so I wrote them one essay, one lecture first, each summer, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And those are in this book. And I, I've continued to have written a new one last summer. I'm preparing to write a new one this summer. So I think of it as like an ongoing project, and maybe one day it'll be a longer book. I don't think it's an exhaustive how-to book about the craft of playwriting. It's much more personal than that. So both of these books, I was so gratified that they were published at the same time. They published, I think, a day apart in September. And that felt I didn't plan that, but that felt appropriate in a lot of ways. So it's been really meaningful to see them, get out to people, to readers. Obviously the poems, had been published in journals and magazines, including Sugar House Review. But this is obviously the first time that they're all together. They're a sequence of 101 poems, all composed of, tercet stanzas without any punctuation, other than the occasional capitalization of a word. So it's been really exciting and gratifying and scary and all those things to get both of these works out there in a cohesive sense.
Wonderful. Speaking of the poetry in Our Cancers, is there a passage that you would be willing to share with us that
Sure.
is particularly resonant, or?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll read you sometimes I just read the first three. They're all pretty short. Yeah. And they give a good sense of the story. I mean, one of the things that's important to me with my poetry collections, and I think it is because I'm a playwright as well, is to try to tell a story, over the course of a poetry collection. And I think a lot about sort of dramaturgical notions when it comes to a poetry collection. So anyway, that's partly why these three poems begin the collection. So they're just numbered. This is one. This is just poem one. Waking up, middle-aged, descending to a kitchen like the inside of a lantern, with a babe, a flickering babble when you pause at the running faucet to ask, love, can you feel my breast? Oh no, is all I can say, collapsing finally, a spark catching. 2, another morning, sirens roused us to the specter of a businessman static with ash. He was confused where he was. On Water Street, we craned our necks, receipts cascading, the exponential rose blooming through the second tower. An old woman fell to her knees. Oh no, how your tears then scattered the road out of the blast, breathing our choking malediction lost in the crush of the multitudes reborn from dust. Thank you for crying for us. 3, we drove into the deepening blizzard to the bar of an inn where I confessed, you confessed, tabletop votives around us like prayer, and took you home and could have let you go into black trees, blue snow, pale moon, but followed and turned you around with my voice. Then kissing in the brisk capsule of the car, idling beside loose farmyard walls, snowflakes occluding breath-blearing glass, and serpentine, the mountainside slicing swish around, harrowing switchbacks along a river unfrozen within, then climbing indiscreet stairs to the tall arc of your spine in the old bed in the old house as the cinders nestled in the cast iron stove. Wind gasping in the rafters. In the morning, you opened your eyes to the bright, cold room with your wild, wide smile that asks, what's next? This. Early morning, eyes closing, you're whirled away from me into another bright, cold room where they will excise the ember of your disease. You are going where I fear I cannot follow.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I'm curious about the pathway of creating something like this for you. Where is the initiation of the spark of those words that end up on the page for you? Does it start as something that's in the body? Do you think of things first? And then how do they make it into written form for you?
When I'm writing well, for me, what I consider well, I don't know if anybody else will ever think that when I'm writing, but when I feel like I'm writing truthfully, it's very unconscious. It's not. I've even written plays about what mediums do and the so-called occult, and I've written for many reasons and many versions of ghost stories. But I think one reason I've been drawn to those types of stories is because for me, the writing process is, as a first draft, is very much a feeling of, receiving something or, serving something or channeling something. That's probably just my unconscious mind or my subconscious or something or what have you. And then because I am obsessive, I revise obsessively and for a long time and try to craft what usually arrives in a pretty unconscious way. So, I didn't set out to write a collection that would be a series of poems, all of which are in 3-line stanzas. That just sort of arrived. It just seemed, and I can work backwards and see. This is a bit on the nose, but the part of the experience of what my wife and I were going through was shattering. We felt like our lives were fragmented in fragments. These are all cliches, picking up the pieces. So looking back, it makes sense why poems that felt like fragments. Some of these poems, I think, really are poems that can be published alone, but the power, I hope, of the collection altogether is the power of these minimalist, fragmented poems read together, read in pretty much in order. I would hope, but yeah, they all began really with the sense of a voice, and hearing a voice, which I've written about before too. I don't actively hallucinate voices, although I've had a few experiences where I have. But I think like many writers, you can still feel like you're listening. You know, I mean, it's a cliche about acting too, right? You know, that the best actors are great listeners, you know, and they're reacting as much, if not more, than they're performing or presenting or putting forth something, you know. We talk in the theater about serving the play, right? That the actors, the director, and the playwright need to serve the play, what the play wants to be. You know, and so I feel the same way about whether it's poetry or essays. If I become too self-conscious about what I'm doing, I'll just get in the way. It'll be less than it could have been if I just listened more. And then as a book gets closer, manuscript gets closer to being published, or play gets closer to being premiered, I think you need to become more self-conscious. You transition, or I do, from the kind of listening, channeling phase of things to thinking more critically, and to getting more of an outside perspective on what you're writing in order to craft the thing. But yeah, so these poems really just came. I mean, I give it a subtitle of a chronicle in poems because, again, I wanted to communicate the passage of time too, over the course of what for us was a year and a half, you know. Hoping maybe to capture something of, again, talking about change, how I was changed by what we went through, how my wife was changed, how our marriage was changed, family. There are a lot of memories in some of these poems, so even how our memories were changed. Again, I think, you know, trauma doesn't just change things about your life. I think trauma changes your identity. You know, I think I write about that in the essay collection, whether it's you're a refugee from war, or you're a veteran from war, or you've survived some kind of, you know, violent assault, or, you know, it changes who you think you are, who you felt you were, how you saw yourself in the world previously. And anytime you have that sort of change, I think it then alters your perception of the future and the past. So that's why the poems don't just stay in the moment in terms of our experience with cancer, but also move backwards and forwards in memory. Yeah, so I don't know. I warned you I could get going and just keep talking.
So, no, I'm fascinated. This is fascinating. Thank you. So in that listening, as you are in the creative process, and now you are on the other side of the publication of it, and you can't go back and obsess over the words anymore, right? And or maybe you do, but you're not changing them on the page anymore, right? And so does as you read these words aloud at this point, does it feel as though you're listening in on someone else's life? Does it feel do you feel connected to it in the same way now?
I do. I'm in a transitional phase for sure, you know, and that it still feels so recent, that I do feel, you know, a lot of the same emotions, have a lot of the same thoughts I had when writing them, and certainly when revising them. And yet at the same time, as you said, you know, once it's like opening a play, right? Once to some degree it's cooked, right? It's out there, it's out in the world, and there's something wonderfully liberating about that. There's something.
Oh, are you okay? You know, my microphone just changed. Is that okay?
You popped out for just a second. Just repeat the last 10 words or so that you said.
Oh, I think maybe I'm out of, I apologize for the technical. Let me just fix this because I think this is a better microphone.
I was just saying, that it's a lot like opening a play, you have a lot of the same feelings of liberation, being free of something, the excitement for seeing how people react to it, as well as the anxiety about perceived or imagined imperfections. Well, not even imagined, of course it's imperfect. There's no such thing as a perfect work of art. So there is a kind of letting go that has to happen. That's transitioned. I mean, what's helped me is now, so since finishing treatment, I've been working on a collection of prose poems, which I've got right here on my desk. And those have been, it's called Survivor's Notebook, and it's about what happens after the chronicle of treatment. And so it's been helpful to be able to transition, to another project like that is still so personal, but it's very different. Again, these are prose poems, and they're kind of a hybrid with dramatic monologue, because I want them to feel both musical and conversational. So I've transitioned a lot of my anxiety, inspiration into that project.
Wonderful. So you mentioned this idea of serving the play, and if we can switch over to a story that happens a bit, and
Sure.
there's this section, and I'll just read, if it's all right with you, from page 37, that it feels to me like the Hamlet speech, that feels like Shakespeare telling actors, "Speak the speech I pray you," right? I'll just read this. Speech on stage is compressed and precise. Each line, theoretically, each phrase or word reveals something new, increments or more of plot or characterization or theme in that order of efficacy, conveyed without patronizing or outpacing the audience, while allowing for laughs and gasps and utterly airless points of apprehension, and all this without shattering the illusion of reality if our style is naturalism, or the reality of the illusion if something else. As I read this section, I just thought, if every playwright's play came with this sort of, there's more to it than that section, but if everyone, I feel like, oh, all right, let's take hands. I kind of get a feel of the rule book for something that you have written. Not that there's a right or wrong way to do it, but there's always a hope of wanting to do it right. And so do you still feel that way? That section about playwriting, do you still, how does that live in you now in the work that you're creating, and when other people get their hands on it?
Yeah, they all the essays feel so recent to me that I think they are, for better and for worse, an accurate description of how I think about craft when I'm writing a play. And again, that's all it is. It's not how I think everybody or anybody else should think about writing a play. And at the same time, when I was working on writing that, I was also aware that when you're writing about craft or talking about craft, it's never going to be exactly what you do personally.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? There's a certain, there's a certain artificiality, or, and I tried to sort of bake that into the book in terms of either to sometimes say that outright, or in terms of the self-deprecatory sense of humor in the lectures / essays. Because I imagine somebody could read this and then read or see a play of mine and have all kinds of objections, or feel like I wasn't following my own advice or what have you. But at a certain point, I realized you can't be. People are going to, if they're interested in the craft of playwriting, they're going to learn more by reacting to a strong statement. So there are times in the essays and the lectures where I guess I take a stand. and on a certain issue, whether it's again that feeling that for me, every play is about some form of conflict. It may be very subtle conflict. It may be very, subjective to the characters. But for me, that is really important, because I do think conflict is what makes people invest in the character and lean forward in their seat and wonder and care about what's going to happen next, in the story. But again, I'm always just talking about how I think about plays, and how that's changed over the course of 20, 25 years now too. Some of these ideas I sort of backed my way toward, because I came to playwriting and poetry wanting to, not wanting to follow any rules. For me, coming from a traumatic, abusive childhood, writing was a rebellious act. If I was going to write the truth, if I was going to tell some version of the truth about my life, or about life as I understood it as a younger person, it implicitly was a rebellion against my abusers or my oppressors. And it might not just be my parents, but it could be the culture at large or whatever, So the idea that I would sometimes hear as a younger writer, like, oh, you've got to learn your scales before you can write your symphony or whatever, I would just roll my eyes at, and just hate that idea with a passion. Some of that was insecurity. Some of that I think was very healthy. I think it's really healthy and important for an artist to feel like they are discovering the art for themselves. I think you can learn a lot from mentors. You can learn a lot from just practicing the art. But the idea of giving someone a formula or rules just has never worked for me. So again, so the essays try to sort of capture how I personally developed a sense of craft. When I started, I went to the Brown University playwriting program, and at the time, maybe it's still true, that was a program you went to, or one of the programs you would go to if you really wanted to do something different. If you were, I guess, more interested in perhaps even experimental playwriting. I think many of the playwrights that have gone through that program have achieved mainstream theater success to some degree, because it was started by Paula Vogel, and to some degree maybe because she sort of through her talent and skill and determination, she broke into the mainstream in a way, and maybe something of her aesthetic has carried through, as with many of the Brown playwrights. But I went there because I just didn't want to be told what to do. And we would meet once a week for 3 hours, share our writing. And then we would take one other class from anything else that Brown offered. All you had to do was make a case for how it related to what you were writing. And so it's really much more like a writing residency than going to school, and that really worked for me. But then when I got out of grad school and I was trying to stay afloat financially, I was teaching, and I was suddenly having to try to explain, quote unquote, how to write a play. So that began, I guess, a long ongoing journey of, thinking about these ideas of principles of storytelling. Certainly not rules, but, how does a story work? How does a story work on stage? How does it make people listen and care? And, and it truly is an ongoing and personal question, I think, for all of us.
I appreciate that. And I love always the application of what happens in the theater, especially, but what happens creatively to the just the greater sense of life and what happens in life, that whether we're trying to overcome trauma and a past, or dealing with a creative process, or just dealing with life at hand, that it's this delicate balance between getting out of your own way or getting out of the way so that you can create life or the story, and then and also bringing just enough of yourself to it that you're being true to the work.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate
Yeah, sure.
So you have a few commissions. Your website speaks of, lists a couple of commissions that you have been a part of, that you shared before this, maybe in flux a little bit because of where we are with pandemic and the state of things in the world. But a couple of those are seem like really exciting projects in terms of what's happening in the conversation in the American theater right now. And I wonder specifically about this turn from working on such a personal, producing work that is so personal and so of you, and then moving to greater, bigger things. One of the commissions is from Center Theater Group in Los Angeles to write a play about Syria, Hollywood, and cancer. Another, which sounds very exciting to me in terms of what's going on in the American theater right now, is for an American Revolutions joint commission from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and the Public Theater. Of course, both organizations and led by leaders who are at the forefront of the sea change, as Nataki Garrett has been quoted for discussing. But I wonder about your place in that, and moving from that very personal work of producing this collection of essays and poetry that comes from you, and then moving to a writing of something that is bigger than you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, for many years, I felt like I couldn't write plays about what was happening in the world, because I was afraid, or I felt I would be inauthentic in some way. In the sense of writing, I guess, what you would call an issue play, or, you know, a play that could be perceived as topical in some way. I felt like it had to be grounded in personal experience for me. I didn't want to feel like I was exploiting anything or appropriating something. And to some degree that changed, or maybe I found a way in when I started working with Paul Watson, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning combat journalist who won the Pulitzer Prize for a photo he took during the Battle of Mogadishu in 1993. And getting to know him and writing a play, The Body of an American, to tell his story, and a collection of poetry, War Reporter, to tell his story. And to some degree, working with him, it took over my life for maybe 10 years, in that it was a play that it ended up being two collections of poetry. This libretto for Jonathan Berger's opera that's also about Paul Watson. So through him, I felt like I could tell his story, which was able to address, in many ways, just the state of modern warfare, U.S. imperialism, the wars, obviously, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And with the more recent play, you know, again, Paul Watson has been my way in. He and I, that play is based on the experience we had, again, in real life. You know, these are close to documentary plays. When he was covering the war in Syria, while at the same time dreaming of a new life, a second life, a retirement from war reporting, and a new life in TV. So we spent a lot of time putting together sort of a prestige cable drama pitch, you know, about journalists covering the war in Syria. And the entire time I said to him, you know, I'm much more interested in this process in terms of what poetry or playwriting might come out of this experience, rather than thinking it would turn into a TV show. And spoiler alert, it did not turn into a TV show, but it did turn into a collection of poetry. And now there's Play in Progress, which is the play for Center Theater Group. Yeah, and they're all, because of the pandemic, they're all sort of, those new commissions are in developmental limbo, which they might have been in otherwise. Plays do take a long time sometimes to go from. When I was in grad school, I saw Terrence McNally give a talk, and he said something about, I believe he said it's been his experience that a new play takes about 6 years from the playwright writing end of play on the page to opening night of the premiere production. And when I heard that, I was maybe 23, and 6 years, I mean, my heart just sank, and 6 years still seems like a long time. And of course, now I realize that sometimes it happens in 2 years, and sometimes it happens in 10 years. You just don't know how the play you're writing, sometimes it never happens for certain plays. And, you just don't know, especially if, like me, you follow your gut and your instinct with your projects. So anyway, these plays may have already continued to be in development, but that's where they are right now. And in many ways, it's because, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, like many theaters, has had a lot of challenges first with the wildfires in Oregon, and then with the pandemic. So that program is pretty much shut down, the American Revolution's commissioning program. So that play is a play trying to respond to the Sandy Hook shooting 10 years ago. So it probably won't premiere there. And that play was different in that I, again, was trying to write about something that I do feel very passionate about, as many people do, that feels dangerous. One of my mentors when I was younger was Romulus Linney, who used to always say, write toward danger. When you sense something dangerous in your writing, not just the subject matter, but even in the moment. And I'm sure as an actor or director, you can connect to this idea. When you sense where the danger is, you got to lean into that. You have to turn towards that. Yeah. For the quote unquote normal people, that's pretty counterintuitive, and that's something I try to work with when I'm teaching. We have, most of us, me too, often have an impulse to steer away from that danger. Anything that makes us feel uncomfortable or exposed or vulnerable. And I've come to believe it. It's so important and it's a gift when you sense that vulnerability and you can turn towards it, and you can hopefully risk something of yourself to discover something of yourself. So the new play, that I'm working on about Sandy Hook felt dangerous and risky to approach, and still does. And I've tried to keep it very focused and very personal as a story, rather than, there could be another history play, even though it's only 10 years ago, but treating it as a history play that could be quite wide in scope and could be a powerful, meaningful play. But for me, I needed to, focus on a few characters and let it be as personal as possible. The first act is just a monologue spoken by the mother of the shooter the morning before the shooting. And, I needed to find, and I did discover, a very personal way to connect to that storyline, thinking of my childhood and the mental illness in my family, never literally having an experience like that, but the emotional core of that story was and feels very personal to me. And again, this idea of trauma, on a personal level and also on a cultural or societal level, how do we survive it? How do we encounter it? How do we change and discover and create meaning and connection, in the wake of in the wake of trauma, in the wake of catastrophic change. So yeah, that's where I am with the new plays. It's a very a few people who have read it so far. It's a difficult subject. It's similar to what I was trying to do with a collection called Our Cancers. This is going to scare a lot of people away, and I've got anxiety and ambivalence about that. But I also felt that this is just the truth. This is just my experience. Something like 2/3 of people will have some diagnosis of cancer in their lifetime. It's a very common thing. The idea of repressing the experience of something like cancer, hiding from it, either privately or in terms of my creativity, that just doesn't make sense to me. So, when it comes to larger social questions, it's a similar feeling and a similar approach. So much of the abuse in my childhood revolved around repression and secrecy and lies, as much as outward oppression. And I grew up witnessing the destructive effects of a lack of communication and a lack of connection. And so that's why it's just so important to me in my work to try to write about subjects that might be considered difficult or taboo or too dark, and to try to find not just consolation, but again, connection, beauty, again, in terms of what you're doing with the language and with structure and storytelling. I mean, meaning and beauty for me are synonymous. Beauty is not about pleasing everybody. It's about making some kind of sense, finding some kind of form for what can often feel formless and painful. So that's where I am with the new plays. We'll see as the theater starts to come back. I mean, it is coming back. It has come back in many ways. We'll see where these plays develop. There's one other play. I'm actually, something I'm doing for fun, which I'm excited about, is adapting a play by an old friend, a novel by an old friend of mine. It's a new book called Borges and Me, about the writer Jorge Luis Borges. And this is by someone who was a mentor of mine when I was younger, Jay Perini. And it's really, he calls it autofiction, but it's close to memoir, I suppose. And it's based on a week or so when he chauffeured the great Argentine writer Borges around into the Highlands of Scotland. So it's very funny. I think it's got some serious and darker themes too. But I started it really at the height of the pandemic as an escape in some ways. I think of it as an entertainment, which is a bit lighter than some of my usual fare. So we'll see where that goes.
Wonderful. So we're coming to the end of our time already. I can't believe it's gone so quickly.
I told you I could get going. It's because it's the Irish. It's the Irish in me.
I could keep listening. So thank you. And I wonder, as we prepare to depart, what if there's anything to add to that urging from Romulus to write toward danger. Mm-hmm. So if there are people in this audience who are in the midst of their creative process, in the midst of creation, mm-hmm. which they probably are if they're connected to Sugar House, but who are creating in such a time as this, do you have anything to add about creating toward danger, or creating around the unspeakable, creating and, mm-hmm. and putting language or form to the formless, as you say?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of cultivating trust, trust that in writing toward danger, writing about things that trouble you, disturb you, intrigue you, trusting that there's a destination that will not feel scary. There is a, there's a shoreline you're going to reach in which you're going to have discovered and found and shared some meaning with people, and that's going to feel really good. It's going to feel like that risk you took was worth it. Not always, I guess, I mean, sure, you can write things and you can feel like you've made yourself vulnerable and maybe it's not received the way you'd intend, but I think, I really think in the overall, you can't lose following that impulse on just a personal level. But it takes, it takes practice. It is a practice, obviously, to write and to write in a certain way. And, I think the more you do it, the longer you do it, you cultivate a sensitivity to the danger and the risk that is meaningful for you, that you can write about as opposed to another writer. And again, I think you can develop that sense of reaching the shore, of meaning, and sharing that with people, whether it's poetry, which is often shared, through the page, but of course can be shared through performance, or with a play or any other performance art, connecting in a much more obviously communal way. They're just two sides of the same coin. I think it's still about connection, reaching out, sharing, who you truly are as you discover who you are, as you're changing. It's gonna mean a lot to some people, maybe a lot of people. You don't know. So yeah, have faith, right? What did Seamus Heaney say on his deathbed? Purportedly, do not fear, or I think he said it in Latin, whatever that is. And I think that's a good part two to the idea of right towards danger. Feel that danger, but don't fear it.
Yeah.
Push through it. So that's the art that's always mattered to me. The writers I first found were poets. Before I found the theater, they were poets. They were the poets that were often, still are, somewhat pejoratively referred to as confessional poets. Whether that was Sylvia Plath or Robert Lowell, Anne Sexton. Those were the poets that I discovered as a kid, as a teenager, and they were telling the truth about difficult, hidden things, and they were such a consolation to me. Sometimes I tell people, oh, writing saved me as a kid, as a teenager. That's true, but it's equally true that reading saved me. Well, the writing that other people created at great risk to themselves, taught me so much, not just about writing, maybe least of all about writing, but taught me so much about surviving.
Well, right. I'm looking right at the cover of a story that happens, and just reading the Los Angeles Times quote that it is a masterclass in survival through art, and I feel that in speaking with you and visiting with you, and I'm so grateful to be in this virtual room. Learning the lesson that beauty and meaning are synonymous, and I see the application of that in art, but also, as I prepare to go and pick up my kids from school. So I just love the layered. I really appreciate the layered application of both this book of essays and also of your poetry in the form of Our Cancers. And I thank you for engaging in this conversation today, Dan.
Of course, thank you. And thank you for such thoughtful questions. And this has really been a privilege and a joy. So thank you.
Thank you. And I hope this is the first of many more interactions like this, perhaps
yes,
collaboration down the road if I have any luck.
That would be great.
But in any case, I am a big fan and will remain a follower of your work. You
Thank
all
you.
in the
Likewise.
audience, yeah, thank you. You all in the audience can follow Dan's work on his website at danobrien.org. That's O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N, O'Brien.org. And if programming like this is valuable to you, please consider supporting Sugar House Review with a donation or a subscription, or follow them and amplify their work on social media. And you can visit them, find them at sugarhousereview.com. Thank you, Dan. Thank you all in the audience for watching. Be well.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.